The Johnson family reunion was in full swing at Riverside Park's community center, with 3 generations of my extended family gathered around folding tables covered in potluck dishes and decades of accumulated grievances. I sat at the far end of one table, quietly eating my cousin Maria's famous potato salad while listening to the annual tradition of family members recounting their achievements for the year. Uncle Bob was describing his promotion to regional sales manager. Cousin Kevin was detailing his new house purchase. Aunt Patricia was showing pictures of her European vacation. The conversation flowed around me like water around a stone, with occasional polite nods in my direction but no real inclusion in the festivities. I'd grown accustomed to being the family afterthought over the past 15 years. The quiet cousin who'd never married, never had children, never seemed to accomplish anything worthy of celebration at these gatherings. I worked as a freelance graphic designer, lived in a modest apartment downtown, and drove a 10-year-old Honda that had seen better days. To my family, I was Ashley Johnson, the 34-year-old disappointment who'd somehow failed to launch into a proper adult life despite their repeated advice about finding a real job and settling down. What they didn't know was that my freelance graphic design work was actually a carefully maintained cover story for something much more significant. For the past 12 years, I'd been building and managing Zenith Capital, a private investment firm specializing in healthcare technology startups. What had started as a small venture fund with money I'd inherited from my grandmother had grown into a portfolio worth over $200 million. My family's perception of me as financially struggling wasn't entirely wrong. I deliberately lived frugally and maintained modest appearances to avoid questions about my actual income. The truth was that most of my profits went directly into charitable giving, specifically anonymous donations to causes that could make a real difference in people's lives. But sitting at this reunion table, listening to my relatives discuss their modest achievements with such pride while completely ignoring my presence, I was beginning to question whether my anonymity was really protecting anyone or just enabling their condescension. Aunt Linda, my father's older sister and the self-appointed matriarch of the Johnson family, stood up with her wine glass to make her traditional reunion toast. At 68, she'd spent her career as a high school principal and had never quite shaken the habit of treating everyone like wayward students in need of guidance. "I want to say how proud I am of everyone here," she began, surveying the room with satisfaction. "Look at what this family has accomplished. Bob's promotion, Kevin's new house, Patricia's successful retirement." She gestured around the table, naming achievements and praising various family members for their contributions to society, their professional success, and their role in maintaining the Johnson family legacy. "We're a family of achievers," she continued. "People who work hard, give back to their communities and make a difference in the world." The murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. "Of course," Aunt Linda added, her gaze settling on me with the kind of pointed look that had probably terrified generations of high school students. "Not everyone finds their path as easily as others." The subtle dig was delivered with a smile, but everyone at the table understood the implication. I was the cautionary tale, the family member who served as an example of what happened when you didn't apply yourself properly. "But that's okay," she continued with patronizing kindness. "Everyone contributes in their own way." Cousin Jennifer, Uncle Bob's daughter, jumped in with the enthusiasm of someone who'd been waiting for this moment. "Actually, I've been thinking about Ashley's situation, and I have some ideas that might help." "Oh, here we go. There are some great programs for people who want to transition into more stable careers," Jennifer said, addressing the table as if I wasn't sitting right there. "I could help you put together a resume, maybe look into some entry-level positions at companies with good benefits." "That's so thoughtful of you," Aunt Patricia chimed in. "Ashley, honey, you're not getting any younger. It's time to think about building something sustainable." Uncle Bob nodded sagely. "The gig economy is fine when you're young, but you need security as you get older. Health insurance, retirement savings, that kind of thing." I smiled and nodded politely, a response I'd perfected over years of these conversations. "I appreciate the concern. The thing is," Aunt Linda said, warming to her theme, "success isn't just about making money. It's about contributing to society, making a difference in people's lives, leaving the world better than you found it." More nods around the table. "Take our family for example. Bob's sales work helps small businesses grow. Patricia's teaching career shaped young minds. Kevin's construction company builds homes for families. We all do work that matters." She paused dramatically, her eyes finding mine again. "But what has Ashley ever done for anyone? What's her contribution? What legacy is she building? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Around the table I saw family members shifting uncomfortably, but also nodding in agreement. This was clearly something they'd discussed before, probably at previous reunions when I wasn't around to hear it. I mean, graphic design is fine, Aunt Linda continued, but it's not exactly changing the world, is it? It's not like she's curing cancer or feeding the hungry or building hospitals. The irony was so profound I almost laughed out loud. Because 3 weeks ago, I'd signed the paperwork for the largest anonymous donation in St. Mary's Regional Hospital's history. $50 million to fund a new cancer research center, complete with state-of-the-art equipment and facilities that would serve patients throughout the entire region. For 5 years I'd been quietly funding medical research, supporting homeless shelters, endowing scholarships for underprivileged students, and bankrolling community development projects. My modest lifestyle wasn't a sign of failure. It was the result of giving away approximately 70% of my annual income to causes that actually mattered. But I'd done it all anonymously, partly for tax reasons but mostly because I believed in the importance of giving without seeking recognition. I'd never wanted praise or gratitude. I just wanted to make a difference. Sitting here listening to Aunt Linda question my contributions to society while surrounded by family members who'd never donated more than $20 to charity, I was beginning to reconsider the wisdom of that approach. Maybe it's not too late, Jennifer offered optimistically. Ashley, what if you volunteered somewhere? Like a hospital or a food bank? It would be good experience and you could start building a track record of community service. Great idea, Uncle Bob agreed. Start small, prove you can handle responsibility, then maybe work your way up to something more significant. Aunt Linda nodded approvingly. Volunteering would be perfect. Show that you care about something bigger than yourself. I was about to respond when the TV in the corner of the community center, which had been playing quietly in the background, suddenly increased in volume. Someone had grabbed the remote to catch the evening news. Good evening, I'm Dana Mitchell with Channel 7 News. We begin tonight with breaking news from St. Mary's Regional Hospital, where officials have announced the largest private donation in the institution's 75-year history. The conversation at our table stopped abruptly as everyone turned toward the television. A $50 million gift from an anonymous donor will fund the construction of the Johnson Cancer Research Center, a state-of-the-art facility that hospital officials say will revolutionize cancer treatment throughout the region. I felt my stomach drop as I heard my grandmother's maiden name attached to the research center. The donation paperwork had included a request to name the facility after my grandmother, who died of cancer when I was 12. Hospital CEO Dr. Margaret Foster says the donation came with a heartfelt letter explaining that the donor had lost a beloved grandmother to cancer and wanted to ensure that other families wouldn't have to endure the same loss. The camera cut to Dr. Foster standing in front of the hospital, holding a large ceremonial check. This generous gift will allow us to recruit world-class researchers, purchase cutting-edge equipment, and provide hope to thousands of cancer patients who might otherwise have limited treatment options, Dr. Foster said. Back in the news studio, Dana Mitchell continued. The mysterious donor has remained anonymous throughout the process, but hospital officials have now decided to reveal their identity in order to properly thank them for this extraordinary generosity. My blood turned to ice. We can now report that the $50 million donation came from Ashley Johnson, a local philanthropist whose quiet generosity has been supporting community causes for years. The screen filled with my photo, a professional headshot that the hospital's PR department had somehow obtained from my investment firm's website. The silence in the community center was deafening. Channel 7 has learned that Ms. Johnson is the founder and managing partner of Zenith Capital, a private investment firm specializing in healthcare technology. Sources close to the hospital say this is not her first major donation, but rather the latest in a long history of anonymous charitable giving. I could feel every pair of eyes in the room turning toward me, but I kept staring at the television screen, watching my carefully constructed anonymity evaporate in real time. The Johnson Cancer Research Center is expected to break ground next spring and will be fully operational within 3 years. Dr. Foster says the facility will serve patients throughout the tri-state area and will likely attract some of the world's leading cancer researchers. The news segment ended and moved on to weather, but nobody in the community center was paying attention to the forecast. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Finally, Aunt Linda found her voice. Ashley. Her tone was completely different from the condescending authority she'd wielded just minutes earlier. Did they just say you donated $50 million? I looked around the table at my family's shocked faces. Uncle Bob's mouth was hanging open. Jennifer looked like she'd seen a ghost. Cousin Kevin was frantically checking his phone, probably trying to verify what we'd all just heard. Yes, I said quietly. But how? Aunt Patricia stammered. Where did you? $50 million. The investment firm they mentioned. Zenith Capital. I've been building it for 12 years. Building it how? Uncle Bob asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Healthcare technology investments. Medical device startups, pharmaceutical research, biotechnology companies. It turns out there's quite a lot of money to be made in helping develop treatments that save lives. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was explaining my success to people who just finished lecturing me about the importance of contributing to society. But you live in that little apartment, Jennifer said, confusion evident in her voice. You drive that old car. You always seemed poor. I suggested. Unsuccessful. Like I hadn't figured out how to be a proper adult. She nodded, looking embarrassed. I live modestly because I give most of my money away. The apartment is comfortable and convenient. The car runs fine. I don't need luxury when there are cancer research centers to fund. Aunt Linda was staring at me like she'd never seen me before. Ashley, I had no idea. None of us did. I know. But why didn't you tell us? Why didn't you ever mention what you were doing? Would it have mattered? Would any of you have been interested in my work if you'd known it was profitable? Or were you only interested in dismissing it because you assumed it wasn't? The uncomfortable shifting around the table told me everything I needed to know. For 15 years, I continued, I've listened to lectures about finding a real job, getting serious about my career, starting to contribute something meaningful to the world. Not once did anyone ask what I was actually working on. Not once did anyone show curiosity about my projects or my clients or my goals. Ashley, we didn't know, Aunt Patricia began. You didn't want to know. It was easier to assume I was a failure than to consider that maybe I was building something you couldn't see. I stood up and gathered my purse. For the record, the Cancer Research Center isn't my first major donation. Over the past 5 years, I've given away approximately $40 million to various causes. The Children's Scholarship Fund at the community college? That was me. The new wing at the homeless shelter? Also me. The free clinic that opened downtown last year? Me again. The stunned silence continued. But here's what's really interesting, I said, looking directly at Aunt Linda. You asked what I'd ever done for anyone, what my contribution was, what legacy I was building. The answer is that I've probably done more to help this community than everyone in this room combined. I just did it quietly without needing recognition or praise. I paused at the edge of the table. The difference between us isn't that you've accomplished more than me. The difference is that you need everyone to know about your accomplishments, while I've been content to let my work speak for itself. Uncle Bob finally found his voice. Ashley, we're sorry. We had no idea about any of this. I know you're sorry. But sorry doesn't change the fact that you spent 15 years treating me like a charity case while I was literally running a charity. I walked toward the exit, then turned back one more time. For what it's worth, I'm proud of all of you. Bob's promotion, Kevin's house, Patricia's retirement. Those are real achievements that matter. But maybe next time, before you decide someone hasn't contributed enough to society, you might consider asking them what they've actually been working on. The drive home was surreal. My phone was buzzing constantly with calls and texts from family members who'd apparently spent the time since I left frantically Googling my name and my company. The search results, I imagined, were quite illuminating. When I got home, I found 17 voicemails, 43 text messages, and 87 emails. Most were from family members expressing shock, apology, and requests for a chance to talk. Several were from reporters who'd somehow gotten my contact information and wanted interviews about my philanthropic work. One voicemail stood out from the rest. It was from my cousin Maria, the one whose potato salad I'd been eating when this whole drama began. Ashley, it's Maria. I just wanted to say, I'm proud of you. Not because of the money, but because of what you've done with it. My mom died of cancer 5 years ago, and knowing that there's going to be a research center that might help other families, that means everything to me. Thank you. That message made all the years of condescending family conversations worth it. The next morning, I woke up to find my story on the front page of the local newspaper. Local philanthropists' secret generosity revealed. The article detailed not just the hospital donation, but the investigative work reporters had done to uncover my other charitable activities. It turned out that my anonymous giving hadn't been quite as anonymous as I'd thought. Once reporters started digging, they found patterns, connections, and sources willing to talk about the mysterious donor who'd been quietly supporting the community for years. By noon, I'd received calls from 3 television stations, 2 magazines, and the mayor's office, which wanted to give me some kind of civic achievement award. I declined all the interview requests but agreed to meet with the mayor. Public recognition wasn't something I'd ever wanted, but if it encouraged other people to give back to their communities, maybe it was worth the discomfort. The family reunion aftermath took weeks to settle. Aunt Linda called repeatedly, alternating between apologies and requests for advice about getting involved in charity work. Uncle Bob wanted to discuss investment strategies. Jennifer asked if there were opportunities to volunteer with my foundation. The most meaningful conversation came 3 weeks later when I met Aunt Linda for coffee at a small cafe downtown. "I owe you more than an apology," she said after we'd ordered. "I owe you an acknowledgement that I was completely wrong about your life and your contributions. Thank you. I keep thinking about what you said at the reunion. About how we never asked what you were actually working on. You're right. We assumed we knew everything about your situation without ever bothering to learn the facts. It's easier to make assumptions than to ask questions," I said. "But that's not an excuse. We're your family. We should have been interested in your work, your goals, your dreams, regardless of whether we thought they were successful." She stirred her coffee thoughtfully. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure. Why did you keep it secret for so long? Why didn't you want us to know what you were accomplishing?" It was a fair question that I'd been asking myself since the news broke. I think partly because I was afraid you'd only be interested in me if I was successful. I wanted to know that your love was unconditional, not based on my net worth. And partly because I was tired of defending my choices. When you all assumed I was struggling, you left me alone to do my work. If you'd known I was successful, you might have had opinions about how I should be spending my money or running my business. Aunt Linda nodded slowly. We probably would have. But mostly, I continued, because I believe that charity should be about helping people, not about making yourself look good. The moment you start giving for recognition instead of impact, you've missed the point. That's a beautiful philosophy. It's also a luxury that comes with having enough money to give anonymously. Not everyone can afford to be modest about their achievements. We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching people walk by the cafe window. "Ashley," Aunt Linda said finally, "I want you to know that I'm proud of you. Not because of the money but because of the person you've become. Generous, thoughtful, committed to making a difference in the world. Thank you. That means a lot. And I want you to know that you'll always have a place at our family table, regardless of your bank account. I appreciate that. But I also hope you'll consider being more open about your work going forward. Not for recognition, but because the rest of us could learn from your example." 6 months later, at the next Johnson family reunion, the dynamic was completely different. Instead of lectures about finding a real job, I fielded questions about impact investing, philanthropic strategy, and the most effective ways to support community causes. Uncle Bob had started volunteering at the food bank. Jennifer was organizing a charity drive at her office. Even Aunt Linda had joined the hospital's development board, using her educational background to help with fundraising strategy. When it came time for the traditional toast, Aunt Linda stood up with her wine glass and looked directly at me. "To Ashley," she said, "who taught us all that the most important contributions are often the ones nobody sees." The applause was warm and genuine, but what mattered most was that it came from a place of understanding rather than condescension. As I drove home that evening, I reflected on how much had changed since that awkward news segment had revealed my secret. I was no longer anonymous, but I was also no longer invisible to my own family. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't hiding your light under a bushel. It's letting people see what they've been overlooking all along. The Johnson Cancer Research Center broke ground 8 months later. At the ceremony, surrounded by my family and hundreds of community members whose lives would be touched by the facility, I realized that maybe recognition wasn't such a terrible thing after all. As long as it led to more giving, more caring, and more families like mine learning to see each other clearly, it was worth every moment of discomfort. After all, what good is making a difference if nobody else is inspired to do the same?